All right, we are live with Alexander Mercouris and the very, very special guest that we love having on the show, Professor Jeffrey Sachs. How are you?
Very
Mr.
good.
Sachs?
Very good.
Good.
Good to be with you.
Good to have you on. And a quick hello to everyone that is watching us on Rockfin, Odyssey, Rumble, YouTube, and theduran.locals.com. A quick shout out to our amazing moderators as well. Thank you very much to all our moderators. Alexander, Jeffrey, we have a lot to discuss, so let's get to it. Alexander.
Indeed, and the thing I think we perhaps need to discuss most, at least initially, is President Putin's extraordinary interview with Tucker Carlson. Now, we've already done programs about this, Alex and I, but Jeffrey, you've been reading this interview. As I said, this is a monumental interview. It covers huge amount of ground. It answers questions. I mean, this is one of the things that is striking about Putin is he actually, when you put a question to him, he answers it. He does give you lectures, but he actually also answers your questions. And of course, the two things that came across to me is, on the one hand, he is extremely disappointed about his relations with the West. He feels that Russia has been placed under relentless pressure for many years. He's, I think, a bit baffled as to why this has been. But secondly, and this is an important point, which perhaps we haven't highlighted enough, he's still prepared ultimately to come to some kind of an understanding, provided obviously he thinks it's in Russian interests, and provided he has a negotiating partner on the other side, on the Western side, on the US side, that he can work with. He is not shutting the door. That was my take, at least.
It's an extraordinarily sophisticated and shrewd interview. This is the first point, far too sophisticated for the mainstream American media, by the way, which could not make heads or tails of it, didn't want to deal with anything of the substance. The Washington Post called it rambling, which means that with the American attention deficit disorder, if it's not in one soundbite, forget it. But when you listen to it, and then I just reread it again now, it's actually extremely sophisticated and extremely interesting. I think there is a core truth and message which Putin is in an extraordinary position to understand and to explain. And that is the remarkable fact that the end of the Soviet Union did not mean at all the end of the US pressure and attack on Russia. And I think that this is the real lesson of this. It wasn't actually anti-communism, it was anti-Russia. And it goes back 2 centuries, I would say, to British Russophobia, which at least a century and a half before, or let's say a century before communism, was completely Russophobic. And the reason is Russia's big, it's powerful, and in the British and US grand strategy, that per se is a threat, not the behavior, not the communism or the post-communism, simply the fact of a large, capable country is a threat. And what we see after 1991, according to Putin's analysis, and I think it's absolutely correct, and it helped me to understand things because I was there in 1991. I was there in 1992. I witnessed firsthand a lot of this. He says, Russia said, we just want normal relations. And the answer was no from the United States. We want to surround you. We want to make sure that you are weakened in every way. We will send the CIA in to create unrest in the Caucasus. We will send the CIA into your neighboring countries to overthrow governments. And this is the narrative. it's right, by the way, because you and I and we know the history of this, but the American people do not know the history of any of it because it's never told. And one thing that I found absolutely fascinating, Putin came out of the KGB. He knows the CIA. This whole interview is infused with his knowledge of what's really going on in U.S. policy, not the superficial level. And he's constantly saying to the American politicians, well, come on, we know you're doing this. We know you're doing that. And the best they can do is mumble and apologize, because it's actually this deep state that is driving American foreign policy relentlessly. It's anti-Russian. It has remained anti-Russian since 1991. It is not about what Russia has been doing at all. It's blaming Russia for being a large country. That is essentially what this is. It's the same with China, of course. And he makes that point. China's much bigger. The American antipathy to China is that China is large, because that is an affront to American hegemony. And so I found it completely fascinating, the stringing together of this nonstop pressure from the CIA operations in the Balkans at the end of the 1990s, the American withdrawal from the ABM Treaty, the American support for the Chechen rebels at the end of the 90s and early 2000s, and other CIA operation, the engagement of the U.S. in destabilizing Ukraine, the coup, which he says is 2004-5, the Orange Revolution first, and then, of course, the Yanukovych coup in February 2014, where Russia at least did us the favor of giving us the taped call of Nuland and Piat describing the coup online. All of this is put together in an extremely coherent way, completely unassimilable by the American media, because it's contrary to the official narrative. And the official narrative is not the real story. So this is why this interview is so incredibly fascinating. But Putin's also very calm and mature, let me say. Yeah, he knows this is the great game. He knows that he's been involved in this, and game is the word we use for tragedy, because hundreds of thousands of people are getting killed by this game. But he's saying, if you stop, we can end this, and that is the real appeal. The amazing thing is, after the interview came out, the U.S. Senate went right on and voted another $61 billion for continued war, because the whole system is designed to be impervious to facts. This is the truth, because you have a sub-story, which is a clear but, quote, secret deep state, which is true. This is a long-standing U.S. policy. This is the grand strategy, but it can't be admitted. So everything is weird. You have the interview, and the next day the Senate votes as if it didn't occur. A few senators referenced it on the Republican side, but all of the Democrats lined up to vote $61 billion for more slaughter, because that is still the deep state policy. One wonders whether Biden really has anything to do with this anymore. He's obviously not compos mentis, so it's probably not the president. It really is the agencies, as President Putin kept saying.
Absolutely. Lots of points there. Firstly, you're absolutely correct. The British media have also struggled with this interview. They barely covered it. They say it's deranged, rambling, but they don't discuss the content. They absolutely refuse to talk about any of the points, the details that he made. The second point about the fact that it's nothing to do with communism, hostility to Russia. I mean, there was a phrase which really stood out for me, which is, I mean, he doesn't say that he said it himself, but apparently people were saying it to the US in the 90s. You know, You're bourgeois. We're bourgeois also now. What's the problem? I mean, we're the same, and we're not. There isn't this ideological competition, confrontation any longer. So why are you so opposed to us, given that all of that is behind us now? And the third about Britain, which is, of course, my own country. Can I just say, because this is something that I studied, if you read the British media between 1815, the end of the Napoleonic Wars, all the way up to the Crimean War, you could publish any one of those articles today in the British media of today, and it would be absolutely no different. I mean, the language, the characterizations, the stereotypes, the cliches are identical. They are exactly the same. You want to know what the source of modern Russophobia is, you have to look to London. I say that with great sorrow as a person who is myself British. So
it's absolutely true.
Yes.
And by the way, the British imperial strategy we now call offshore balancing, which is Britain as the island nation is going to intervene to stop any large power in Europe. Russia was that large power that needed to be stopped, no matter what it was actually doing. And then this crazy concoction in the middle of the 19th century that Russia is the great challenge to the crown jewel of the British realm, the Indian subcontinent, as if it was really the intention of Nicholas II and Alexander II and III to invade India across the Himalayas. It was insane, but it actually drove British policy. It was the motive force of the Crimean War. And it's exactly the same underlying force right now for the United States. Russia is just too big to allow to be Russia. And so we must contain it in every way. We must have unrest around the Russian periphery. We must decolonize Russia, is the favorite phrase in Washington. We must bring our military bases to Russia's periphery. We must surround Russia in the Black Sea so that Brzezinski's Russophobic vision of 1997 that Ukraine, Romania, Bulgaria, Turkey, and Georgia would be surrounding Sevastopol, just like Palmerston did in the first Crimean War. It's nonstop, but it's just basic geography that is continuing here. And Putin is very calmly explaining this, but he's also telling us, look, here's what's really going on. You talk about who's doing what to whom. Why did you bring in the jihadists into the Balkans? Why did you bomb Serbia for 78 straight days? Why did you leave unilaterally the anti-ballistic missile treaty? Why did you destabilize Russia in the Caucasus region? And he knows because this, and then he constantly says, look, I tell the political leaders, but they tell, they hear from the agencies, they hear from the CIA, they hear from the ones actually doing this. And then Putin, when Tucker Carlson says, why don't you do something about it? He says, look, the agencies talk with each other. This is where the real story goes on, where there's no illusion on either side. But it's so sad that the public can't process any of this. And what's extraordinary is how dangerous this is. It's called a game in game theory, but it could blow up the world, and it's blowing up Ukraine before our eyes, and it just cannot be processed.
Indeed, and of course the British referred to their duel with the Russians in the 19th century as the Great Game, which, by the way, is an expression you won't find the Russians use. And if you read Russian archives of that period, which I have done, by the way, they were not even aware that there was even a great game going on in Central Asia where all of this was being fought out. It was entirely within the British's own imagination. It's
exactly.
Most strange.
They had no intention at all.
At all.
But this is how we talk about China today, also, how China is going to take over the world. China's never shown in 2,000 years the slightest interest in taking over the rest of the world. It's incredible. But this plays because of, it doesn't play. I think the Americans don't trust anything, but they don't hear any of the truth, and they don't, therefore, hear any processing of such an important discussion as this.
Indeed. And the other thing that was astonishing is he has all these interactions with American presidents, with Clinton, with George W. Bush. They get on with each other. They seem to come to agreements with each other, at least not maybe agreements, but at any rate, understandings. And then the president goes away and nothing changes because, of course, the president isn't the person who makes the decisions. Or at least that's what Putin thinks. And he says, it doesn't matter whom you elect, because ultimately, unless there is a fundamental change of outlook on the part of your entire elite, the policy will not change. It will continue exactly as before. Now, that I found, I have to say, the saddest thing, because given how difficult it is, as you said, to reach to the elite and to reach to the media, but through the media to the public, because the media in the West has now experienced complete political elite capture. It's very difficult how we're going to change this.
I think one of the profound problems, both of the British history up to, say, 1950 and the U.S. Hegemony since then, is that so much of policy is secret. The CIA really, truly, by the way, does run a huge amount of U.S. policy and has done so for decades, and in any event is tasked to do things. We know that it's about 80 covert regime change operations since 1947. It's tasked to do things that are absolutely secret. Of course, rumors abound, but then to obfuscate relentlessly so that there is complete confusion about what is actually happening. And you do feel in these discussions, and I've seen it inside the U.S. government, and we've seen episodes like this about, for example, Clinton's first decision to expand NATO in the mid-1990s. It's almost as if he's basically told what to do, and he comes around to it. You don't feel that these are the agents or the principles of these policies, but rather they are the agents. It's explained to Clinton, look, we have a long-standing, deep policy. Russia remains dangerous. This is what we're going to, okay. And then you see inside the debate in the cabinet, for example, on this NATO enlargement question in the mid-1990s, his own Secretary of Defense was completely aghast at this, William Perry, as were most of the top diplomats. But the decisions were not, as we see, the decisions were more deeply entrained. It was explained to him, we've been doing this for decades. Don't stop this now. Now is our opportunity. This goes back to the 1940s and so forth. And this is, I think, what is completely not understood in, let's say, this is what's completely never explained to the American people. And so, again, an impossibility of processing what President Putin said, and therefore understanding that there really is a basic way to peace. And of course, we see every day the denials that NATO has anything to do with this, or any of these other issues has anything to do with the war, except that once in a while the truth slips out, such as when Stoltenberg, the Secretary General of NATO, told explicitly to the European Parliament, of course this is a war over NATO enlargement. Or when David Arakhamia, the leader of Zelensky's political faction in the Rada, says, of course this is a war over NATO enlargement. So once in a while the truth slips, Putin explains it, but then the media won't cover it at all. And by the way, I had my normal correspondence with the New York Times over the weekend on this, which means one way. I write to the editors whom I've known for 30 years. I hear nothing back. They will not cover any of the truth.
No. It's absolutely the case. I mean, what we have in Britain are denials. I mean, Boris Johnson is now denying what everybody knows happened in March and April 2022 about, the way that the role he played in wrecking the negotiations. He says it's all untrue, even though it was being reported at the time in the British media itself. This is one of the extraordinary things. In his own, one of his own ministers, Nadine Dorries, has written a book actually praising him for wrecking the negotiations. But now, of course,
the extraordinarily stupid statements of Sunak and Schultz, worse than children.
Yeah.
Absolute lies. And with Germany, a complete collapse of even the slightest interest of the Chancellor of Germany in Germany's own national interest, called to the White House, and by whatever means, which is a little bit mysterious, he comes out and says nonsense. And interestingly, I'm asked every day, as I'm sure you are, why does Germany behave in this completely weird way? And what's interesting is that when Carlson asks Putin about this, Putin says, I can't figure it out. And that's what I just wrote in an interview response. I can't figure it out either. I write to my former friends in the Chancellery in Germany. They don't answer me anymore either. It's just a kind of shutdown of basic reasoning right now, and just parroting this U.S. narrative. And now it's a U.S. narrative that the president of the United States can't even physically read off a teleprompter anymore. So we're really down to the last bits of this mystery.
The one thing that is, it is reassuring, and that does come across in the interview as well, is exactly what he said. He's a sophisticated man. One senses a sophisticated government now in Russia, and a very disciplined one.
Yes.
They do seem at the moment that they're facing all of this, but they're going to do their business and they're going to sort it out to the best that they can. And I mean, the only thing it seems to me they've decided that the only thing they can do is wait until the West comes to its senses, because
I think that's exactly right, by the way. And I'm watching pretty close up the BRICS process. It's very systematic, very methodical. They're looking at these issues which we've discussed of monetary reform, and in a very professional way. And it's quite impressive, actually. And I think that that's exactly the sense of the interview, which is Putin saying, look, if there was just a normal discussion, we could actually solve this. But if not, we're going to do what we're going to do, and we'll do our best. I think that's exactly the sense of it.
Exactly. I mean, there was, I'm sure you've been following this, but there was apparently a meeting of BRICS Sherpas, which went apparently very well. India and China seem to be working together, despite all the claims that they wouldn't. And, if we could just pivot quickly, because you've written a very, very powerful and strong, and I thought very good article about the Imran Khan situation in Pakistan. This is written before the election, which has now happened in Pakistan, but he's been convicted of the most ludicrous charges. I mean, charges that make absolutely no sense. I mean, the fact that he disclosed the fact that the Americans were plotting against him is apparently, a crime in itself.
Well, it's so, just to say, the Americans called on the military to bring him down in 2022, which they did. It was based on a cable from the Pakistani ambassador. That cable was leaked partly to The Intercept and also to Imran Khan's team itself. when Imran Khan waived it, on the one hand, the United States denied it. And on the other hand, Imran Khan was sentenced to 10 years for espionage on the denied document. And then when the United States was asked about it, the State Department spokesman said, "We respect the Pakistani courts." Again, it's so surreal. You can't even connect logically the beginning of the sentence to the end of the sentence, but it doesn't matter because there's no follow-up, there's no interest. And I'll tell you something interesting. That little op-ed of mine, which I posted on Common Dreams, which I liked very much, I had sent to the New York Times because the New York Times had asked me for a piece about the situation in Pakistan before the election. When they saw that I was accusing the United States of something for which Imran Khan had been convicted of espionage, they told me, "Oh, our editors won't go with something like this." So they would not run a piece like this. And after the fact, and then after, despite the crackdown, the imprisonment, the attempted assassination, the espionage charges, everything, Imran Khan's party wins an overwhelming majority, which is now being partly stolen by utter fraud. I went back to the New York Times, said, "Could I write for you now? 700 words?" No, Professor Sachs, we have other things in the pipeline. It's unreal how hard it is to pierce this wall of stupidity, designed narrative stupidity. They won't have it. They will not listen to any facts report, any facts discuss, any narrative that hasn't come out of John Kirby's mouth at the White House or the State Department. This is an official narrative rag, and that is a tragedy because we can't function like that. Once upon a time, the New York Times reported on the Pentagon Papers, it reported on Watergate, it reported on the CIA, but that was 50 years ago. Now it is a mouthpiece of government.
And I have two things to say. Firstly, Imran Khan's crime was that he wanted to maintain good relations with Russia. So
Absolutely.
it all comes
And
back.
China.
It all comes back to China. It all comes back to that at the end of the day. I mean, it's this desire always to lump everybody into either you're with us or you're against us.
Alexander, in the memo, actually, the U.S. threat is that we are very unhappy about this aggressive neutrality. The term itself is so obscene, but that is the American mindset. And by the way, that goes back for decades. If you are neutral, you are an enemy of the United States. And leaders have been killed repeatedly by the CIA over their neutrality.
Absolutely. And I mean, since you brought up Admiral Kirby, I noticed that even the Saudis are getting fed up and have published a very, very angry statement. I mean, for the Saudis, an unusually strong statement directly contradicting what he's been going around telling everybody about the state of negotiations between Saudi Arabia, the United States, and the United States about normalization of Saudi relations with Israel. And one gets the sense Saudi Arabia, I think, is now a member of the BRICS. I'm not absolutely sure about this, but I think it is. But definitely they're going there. And people around the world are getting fed up with this. People in Pakistan are fed up with this. They're now voting, as you said, to support Imran Khan. And they're angry. I mean, I know Pakistanis. There's lots of Pakistani people here in London, and they are very angry.
They gave him a landslide. Exactly.
They gave him a landslide. And people in even the Saudi princes, I mean, the people who've been stalwart allies of the United States for so many years, they're getting utterly fed up. And they're saying, no, we're not going to have stories told about us by American spokesmen on American television, which is simply not true. And again, American government doesn't seem to get this, that it's not, that these things that they do aren't working in the way that they did once?
The level of trust by Americans in the U.S. government has collapsed. The level of trust by Americans in the media has collapsed. This is nobody believes what is being said, but so far, just the fact of mumbling some nonsense has forestalled any change of policy. That's what's interesting. It's not that people are actually convinced by this. They kind of know something's really wrong. But what has remained the case until today is the absence of a rational alternative discussion at the core of our public deliberations, meaning in our actual institutions, in the Congress, or in the mainstream media. That rational discussion has not occurred.
Professor Sachs, Jeffrey Sachs, once again, a amazing interview. Just to go back, read Putin's interview. It is incredibly interesting.
Absolutely.
It's very coherent.
A lot for us to chew on in the days ahead, I'm sure.
Days ahead, absolutely.
Great to be with you.
Thank you, Jeffrey, again.
Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.